Welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Conference. Next up today, we have Steve Whedon, the President and CEO of Imricor. Imricor is a leading developer of innovative MRI-compatible medical devices, which can be used to carry out real-time ICMR cardiac ablation procedures. Headquartered in the US, Imricor seeks to make a meaningful impact on patients, healthcare professionals, and healthcare facilities by increasing success rates and bringing down the overall costs of cardiac ablation procedures. Just a reminder to the audience, if you want to ask a question, feel free to type it in. You can do that as the presentation's ongoing. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Steve to deliver his presentation. Over to you.
Fantastic, Matt. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm going to share some slides. Should be up now. Because what I want to talk to you today about is that there is a big shift happening in cardiac ablations, electrophysiology and cardiac ablations. And Imricor is at the forefront of this shift. It is, in order to understand this, I think that first it's important to get a good understanding or some feel for what a cardiac ablation is. And a cardiac ablation is a procedure where when your heart is beating irregularly for electrical reasons, a physician will guide a catheter, a tube, just like this, shown in this slide here, up into your heart, take electrical measurements from within the heart, try to diagnose what is causing the problem electrically in the heart that's preventing it from beating properly, and then burning that area and destroying that tissue that's causing the problem. And that then restores the normal heart rhythm, which is getting you back into the way that your heart is supposed to beat. And when they do these procedures today, they do these procedures in what's called an EP. It stands for electrophysiology lab. So cardiac ablations are performed in a lab just like the one that's shown in this picture. There is a patient and a physician who's guiding catheters in from the groin up into the patient's heart. They're looking at X-ray fluoroscopy screens that show them where the catheter is in the heart, and they're taking those electrical measurements, which then show up on these screens over there. And you see over here on the left side of this picture, this is the X-ray fluoroscopy system. It can be tilted around and so forth, and it takes live X-ray images of the heart while the procedure is being performed. The problem with this lab is you can see the catheters very clearly. You can see even bone structure and ribs and spines and so forth. But the one thing you can't see with X-rays is the heart itself. And so when we talk about a transformation in this field, the transformation is just doing this exact same procedure with a different imaging modality, replacing that X-ray system with an MRI system. And all these are pictures of our customers doing what we call MRI-guided, or ICMR for interventional cardiac magnetic resonance. MRI-guided ablation procedures. Same procedure, same doctor standing by the patient, looking across at screens, but now instead of X-ray images with the catheters in shadows, they can see all of the soft tissues of the heart in real time as the heart's beating. And they can do all of the complex electroanatomical mapping that they do in conventional labs, but they do that in the context of real cardiac tissue. They can use the MRI imaging to tell them more carefully where they are, to help diagnose where the problem is, so they don't have to do as much electrical mapping as they normally would have to do. And after they ablate, they can check where they've burned and use the MR imaging to make sure that the burn that they left is a permanent burn and not something that's going to heal such that the arrhythmia just comes back again when the patient goes home. These are the reasons we started trying to do MR-guided cardiac ablations. But it was a big, big project. In order to do that, we've had to develop ourselves over a dozen products. We started with our EP recording system. This is the system that you see it right here in this part of the slide. This shows the electrical activity that the catheter is measuring while it's inside the heart. We have developed our Northstar 3D mapping system, which is shown right here. You see the 3D volumes that are rendered from the images and allow the doctor to, in 3 dimensions, get around inside the heart. We have developed then a whole long line of consumable devices or disposable devices. The vision ablation catheter was the catheter that I showed you on the very first slide. That's the primary catheter that goes in, takes electrical measurements, and burns. But also we have a diagnostic catheter, which is very much like the ablation catheter, but only takes electrical measurements. And so it's a less expensive catheter that you use alongside the ablation catheter to keep the costs of the procedure down. We have a dispersive electrode that goes on the back thigh of the patient. So when you burn from the catheter, that gives a return path for the electrical power. And we have some new devices, a steerable sheath, which is essentially a larger catheter that you guide a second catheter through. It helps you maneuver that catheter more carefully, more predictably inside complex ablation or complex anatomy. And that in particular helps the next two devices, our actively tracked dilator and transeptal needle. That helps these devices cross from the right side of the heart to the left side of the heart. And so when you're doing ablation procedures, of course, there are some arrhythmias that originate from the right side of the heart. There are some that from the left side of the heart. And really, ones on the left side of the heart, these are the complex ablations where we believe MR guidance is going to add the most value. So these new tools allow us then to cross. And then, of course, every one of these sterile devices that are single use has sterile cables associated with it. And those are all their own product, need to be developed under the same quality system, go through the same regulatory approval process. So really a big task for us to make these. But we weren't alone either. We needed partners, and we've partnered with many companies to help enable this entire new field of MR-guided cardiac ablations. The MRI systems themselves, for instance, from Siemens, GE, and Philips, we have had to integrate our tools with their tools so the imaging and the devices and our systems all work seamlessly together in order to provide the same type of environment that doctors have today in a conventional lab, plus the additional benefits of MRI. We've worked with an ablation generator company to make an MR-compatible ablation catheter. We've worked with, they already had made an in-room monitor to be inside the MRI and have a computer monitor that's in the MRI room. We just reapplied that from one application to this new interventional application. There's patient monitoring devices. That's this monitor here. And we connect to that monitor that tells you from the outside what electrical activity is happening in the heart. We've now got a new partner that's making an inboard defibrillator. That is to say, a device that when the patient goes into arrhythmia and they want to cardiovert back to normal sinus rhythm to continue doing the procedure, which happens throughout the procedure, that we've got that available. There's headsets. You can see all of these physicians wearing headsets that allow them to communicate from inside the lab to outside the control room, which is where these folks are here in this upper right-hand part. And then a 12-lead ECG system is brand new from Myrtle Medical. And that is something that will enable the effective treatment of more complex arrhythmias like ventricular tachycardia. Now, the trick was all of these devices had to be reinvented, remade, redeveloped, and go through the regulatory approval process, all to be uniquely MRI compatible. So meaning if you take devices from a conventional lab and bring it into the MRI, it will be attracted to the magnet so that you couldn't possibly use it in that area. And when you start to scan, it can create dangerous situations where the devices themselves can melt. The devices can get induced currents in them that themselves can trigger cardiac arrest in the patients. It was a big, hard problem to make devices like this that are MR compatible, and only Imricor has ever been able to solve this problem for these consumable devices that go in. But knowing that we couldn't do it alone, we have a lot of great partners who have helped us put the entire package together. When I talk about the technology, we have 19 patents. We have, of course, patents just keep coming out of our R&D group, and we'll continue to grow our patent portfolio. But these are really strong patents that are the only technology in the world that has ever proven to be safe and effective for making a catheter type of device that goes inside of a patient and can be scanned with the full power of the MRI. That was the first part of what we did at Imricor 10 years ago. Since then, it's been moving from this R&D company to a clinical trial stage company to a commercial company. Interrupted a bit by the pandemic, but now, and as I'll talk about in a little bit, getting back to doing what we were doing in 2019. And this isn't a small niche market. This is a huge market. It's an $8 billion US dollar, $8 billion worldwide market. It has some of the biggest players in medical devices that work in this field: Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott, and Johnson & Johnson through their Biosense Webster group. This is something that gets a lot of attention. It's been called one of the largest unmet needs in cardiology today. And the devices and the procedures that they do in conventional labs suffer from a lot of limitations, in particular, long procedure times and disappointing effectiveness, first-time effectiveness, where you get an ablation, you go home, things heal, the arrhythmia comes back again. You're back now into the EP lab. You're getting a second ablation, sometimes a third ablation, just to get the job right. And the promise of MRI, since back in the 90s, when it was first thought that, hey, we should try to do these procedures in MRI, the promise has always been that we can do faster, safer, better procedures if we can see what we're doing. And so even now at this early stage of our commercialization, we are approved for sale all throughout the EU, and now in a couple of countries in the Middle East. We are commercial in 7 of those countries in the EU right now, and we'll be growing our commercial sites as we really build our launch out in this 2024. Next, Australia and New Zealand is right around the corner. We are under a review by TGA right now to get our final ablation catheter approval, and then we'll be commercializing across the Australia and New Zealand region. And finally, we'll be moving then toward the US market, which is about half of that $8 billion market is in fact in the US. So that's a big deal for us as well, as we're working through our FDA timelines. Now, everything we do is based on 3 sort of fundamental strategic pillars. And these haven't changed since, well, for a long time, since the IPO certainly, and since we started thinking about how we were going to launch. We want to expand the number of countries that have our technology. That means regulatory approvals in those countries. Then once we have approval, we want to expand the number of sites in each country that have ICMR labs where they can do our procedures. That is an EP lab that has an MRI equipment in it instead of X-ray fluoroscopy. And third, expand our indications. So when an ablation catheter like ours gets approval, it gets approval for one of the types of arrhythmias that a person can get. And you typically start with atrial flutter, then you grow to ventricular tachycardia and atrial fibrillation. Those are the 3 basic arrhythmias that people will treat. And so expanding the number of countries, expanding the number of sites, and then expanding the types of things you can do in each one of those sites is how we grow our business and how we change the standard of care. And this is what we've been doing. So if we look at these are actually operational highlights from our year-end briefing. So this is pretty much what we did in 2023 and leading now into 2024. We have 2 global clinical trials that are beginning now. One is we call the Visible AFL trial, and that is for FDA approval. It's it's for US approval, but it's actually a global trial. We're starting at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore with patients in just a couple of weeks. And we'll also expand to the CHUV in Lausanne, Switzerland, and the Amsterdam University Medical Center in the Netherlands, and ICPS, which is the cardiac center in South Paris. And these will all be sites that participate and enroll patients in our Visible AFL trial. It's a relatively short trial, about 90 patients. I think we have an early exit point at about 70 patients. So these aren't years and years. We expect to finish the enrollment of this study this year, and we'll be going through the FDA approval process as we are doing the study, and then hopefully get approval in 2025. While we're doing that, at the same time, we're doing a European clinical trial called Visible VT, which is the trial to expand the indications for our ablation catheter to do ventricular tachycardia, one of these complex ablation procedures where MR can really add a ton of value. And so this is a process that then we'll just keep replicating, growing our geographies and then growing the indications in each one of those geographies. The other thing that talking about, how you grow your hospital sites, we had great partnerships with Siemens and Philips for a long time on the MRI side. But now, last year, we signed a material services agreement with GE Healthcare to make our devices compatible and work with GE MRI systems. And in fact, GE is funding us to do that work so that they can participate in this new field of MR-guided interventions. And so that was an important development for 2023. And then another thing is, as we entered into 2023 last year, at about this time, I was talking about the goal for the company in 2023 was going to be to expand into other regions outside of Europe, and the Middle East was one of those. And now we have done that. We have distribution agreements in Saudi Arabia and Qatar to grow our footprint of hospital sites across those. And since then we've approved or gained Saudi FDA approval, and that brings Qatar along with it. And so we're really excited that those commercialization efforts are happening now. And the last thing that I think is really cool to talk about is that I'll show you North Star in a moment, but we've got this collaborative partnership with a company called ADIS that we worked with for several years, but now we've codified that into a collaborative research agreement and development agreement. Essentially, this is an AI company that has developed a simulator that lets you do a procedure as if you were in the MRI. And we want North Star, our interface, to be the front end of that simulator. And we also want them to help write some AI that we're going to put into North Star during a regular procedure. And that just briefly looks like this. This is in Lausanne, Switzerland. You see the real ICMR lab right here, the MRI, the EP lab with MRI equipment in it. And you see the ADIS simulator right here. And the idea is that what the screen you're looking at will be our Imricor's North Star 3D mapping system. So you can do a procedure in the simulator, even by scanning a real patient's heart and doing the procedure, simulating, and then going and doing that exact same procedure on the exact same person in the real lab. It will help with training, and it will help with really complex ablations as well. And we'll be highlighting this new system at the European Heart Rhythm Association in just a few weeks, which will allow doctors to see what it'd be like to do a procedure with MRI. And this is North Star. I talked about this, and I'm running a little short on time, so I'll go fast through this. But North Star is this interface that brings the MRI imaging, actively tracked catheters where we can find them, ablation points, electroanatomical mapping, which is what all the color is about, brings all of these things together, and it becomes the central hub of your ICMR lab. This software is so sophisticated that you don't even have to have somebody sitting at the MRI. You control the MRI through North Star. It receives images in real time from the MRI into North Star. Everything is displayed in 3D. It tracks our catheters, everything that you need to do electroanatomically in a really simple way. And it doesn't matter if you've got a GE, Siemens, or Philips scanner, your North Star is always the same. So last couple of slides I have then are just about where we are and what we're doing next. And I'll go kind of quickly through these. These are not new. If you've been following us at all, this is what we've been talking about for a while. These trials take a while to get started. And so now we are at that stage where they are getting started. The Visible AFL trial I mentioned a moment ago, the Visible VT trial that I also mentioned a moment ago, but then also commercialization efforts. So we're not just an R&D company and doing these clinical trials, but this is the year now with the pandemic behind us and a re-engagement with all of our customers that we are going to see consistent, steady growth as we move forward. And all of the risk of product development and things that we had in front of us, say 4 years ago, are behind us today, meaning that now we have all the tools to do every type of ablation possible. We do have to get, of course, approvals for the complex ablations, but the R&D is done, which means at this point, we, along with our partners, have got a lot of really cool milestones ahead of us. I did this slide actually in November, and since then I've painted 2 of them green already, the joint venture to bring the AI with ADIS into North Star and approval in Saudi Arabia. Now we're getting very close to our first enrollment with our FDA trial at Johns Hopkins, and then that one will become fully green. And then more and more of these milestones ahead of us. First in man VT procedures, TGA approval, launches across these various geographies, FDA approval down the road. It's really we're all set up for success now. Now, let's say when you build one of these labs up, everybody, for all of our partners, we participate in a capital sale to set that lab up. But once a lab is set up, and the only thing you're having to do in that lab is Imricor's procedures, we're the only ones who make the consumable devices. So we capture 100% of the ongoing consumable revenue for every procedure that's done. So it's not just that we are transforming an industry, then that becomes something that is really going to make Imricor a special and significant company. And the last thing I wanted to just point out is our management team, and in particular, I wanted to point out the gentleman in the middle of the management at the bottom, the middle management group there. We have a fantastic management team across all of these folks. These are, we're in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, where we have Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and Abbott here. These people have all worked at Boston Scientific or Abbott or Medtronic, and we all have a choice to either work at one of these big companies or work at one of the many, many startup companies that are around here in medical devices. These people are all choosing to stay here, even through the difficult times of the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic, and to get us to where we are now, because these guys know that what we're doing is something very special that not many people in this area or in the world get a chance to do. Makes such a significant change to interventional medicine like we're going to do in such a meaningful way. And most recently, Nick Corkle, who has stepped out of a highly successful career, being previously a portfolio manager with BlackRock and then Lennox, to join Imricor's management team to focus on corporate strategy, and in particular, investor engagement in the short term. So Nick allows us then to have a more intimate and continuous relationship with our investor base, because he's in Australia, and this week he's in Melbourne. Normally he's of course resides in Sydney, but this will give us an opportunity to really keep everybody engaged in what we're doing more closely. And I couldn't be more excited about Nick. And I'd love to sit here and tell you, why is it that Nick, with this very successful career, decides to step away from that and join Imricor to do this? But it's a much better story to hear him talk about it in person. So I encourage you, if you're interested, his contact information is right alongside mine now for investors as you want to reach out with questions or to hear more about what we're doing. Now, with that, I think I'll open it up for questions.
Great, thanks very much, Steve. As you've alluded to, we'll take any questions. So just as a reminder, please feel free, anyone in the audience, if you have a question, just to type it in using the function within Zoom. Steve, the first question I have is, and you've just alluded to it with that last point, but with this being such a pivotal year for the business, are you expecting an increase in interest from institutional investors and the like?
Yeah, I would say, there has been a shift in sentiment toward large companies that are cash flow positive, and Imricor is not alone in our situation of still being, a growth company, a company that is not cash flow positive, but has a huge potential. There are a lot of innovative products and innovative companies out there that are suffering in the markets the same way we are. Nonetheless, I'd say we've had really great support through the pandemic from institutions. We just did a placement and entitlement offer where we had new institutions come onto the register, and there is, I think, a real renewed interest in what we're doing. It's just that during the pandemic, it was hard for us to move forward in any meaningful way. So I think people stepped back for a while. Now it's a great time to step back in, because that is behind us. We're set up now for nothing but success as we move forward.
Very good. The next question is, can you provide an update around TGA approval, and have they given you an approximate decision date on that?
I'd like to say they have, but actually what happened, they're doing what is now the third part of their review, which is the clinical review. And they subcontract that out to physicians and consultants to do that clinical review. They don't say who that is. They don't say what the timeline is, and there's no statutory timeline for it. So the only feedback we can get from TGA is that it is out for review. We don't know when it'll come. What I can tell you is this product has already gone through the CE marking with one of the most diligent and toughest notified bodies in Europe. And our clinical data, of course, is great, clear. It proves safety and effectiveness. And we're certain that at some point, when the timelines allow and the reviews happen, that we'll get that TGA approval soon.
Excellent. Another question that's come through. Currently, Imricor's operations in Europe are at the mercy of hospitals having both working MRI labs and the doctors to run them. So moving forward, what do you see as the inflection point for the business not being beholden to those factors, and when do you think that might be?
I didn't quite catch the first part of that question, Matt.
It was just currently Imricor's operations in Europe are at the mercy of hospitals having both working MRI labs and the doctors to run them. So moving forward, what do you see as the inflection point, and when do you think that will be?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we started, we said, hey, if you already have a diagnostic MRI and the will, we can bring our equipment into your regular old MRI and we can make an MRI lab out of it. But the long term is that we're not bringing our procedures into the MRI. We're bringing MRI into the EP lab, meaning as you expand your EP and ablation practice, or as you're replacing imaging equipment and re-upping your labs, which you do about every 7 to 10 years because X-ray tubes burn out, that you have an opportunity to put an MRI in instead of an X-ray fluoroscopy system. This is the natural progression that will happen. And changing a standard of care, this is a big deal. But then once you change, you don't just change back either. So it both builds and then sustains this momentum. And it's happening now. One of the labs I showed you is in the Schuf in Lausanne, Switzerland, and it is just now commissioned. The Amsterdam University Medical Center is having bids back this week for the new cardiology center that will be built in about 1.5 years. And that is all centered around one crown jewel, which is their new ICMR lab, specifically to do our procedures. So it's happening throughout the world that this change will slowly replace X-ray equipment with MRI equipment, and we're not going to be beholden to finding an MRI, getting time on that MRI, and then having doctors move in and out of this lab. This will be a lab that's just like the rest of their labs that they own, and they can work in it as they see fit.
Great. Well, with that's all the questions we have. So, Steve, thanks very much for your time and presenting to the audience today. It's much appreciated.
I bet. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much, everyone.
No problem. And we'll be back in about 10 minutes with the next session, which is chimeric therapeutics. So look forward to seeing some people returning then. But thanks again.